welcome to our panel for LadiesCon 2021. Panel is called Who Gets to Be a Strong Female Character? Heavy Lifting with a Contested Trope. And I'm going to start off by having my wonderful panelists introduce themselves. Would you like to start, Randee?
Sure. My name is Randee Dawn. I am an entertainment journalist for outlets like Variety and the LA Times. I am also an author. I have a lot of short stories out there, and most recently one came out in Horror for the Throne, One Sitting Reads. I also have a novel coming out next year called Tune In Tomorrow, which is hopefully it is humorous, I think, but hopefully it's humorous, fantasy book. And you can find out more at randeedawn.com. All you want to know right there.
All right, LJ?
Hi, first of all, I want to apologize for the horrible lag of my internet. We are in the midst of a thunder and lightning storm, and there are tornadoes nearby, so we will do our best. I am a writer, novelist. I write science fiction and fantasy. My recent book was published a few years ago, which was the 5th and final book in the Halcyon space opera series, and it was called A Star in the Void. And all my books and information about me can be found on ljcohen.net.
Thank you. And Trisha?
Hello, I'm Trisha J Woldridge. I am an author and an editor. I write child-friendly stuff under TJ Woldridge. Other stuff tends to go into the horror, dark fantasy, dark SF. I also am hearing rumblings of those thunders that LJ has, because Ida's hitting us. So I apologize if I end up like having a moment or two online. I also edit for the Writers Ally, and you can find my short stories in a bunch of places. You can look me up at anovelfriend.com.
Thanks, Trisha. And I'm the panel moderator. I'm Marianna Martin. I have a PhD in cinema and media studies. I worked for a time in the industry in film and television in the US in development, and then I left to pursue my own creative projects, which is a lot more fun. And I'm really excited to be joining all of you here. Oh, and I should mention, in fact, given the composition of our panel, that I am currently serving as a member at large on the board of the organization Broad Universe, where I met all of these fabulous panelists. So if you are an aspiring or current genre writer who is interested in checking out our org, please do. All right, so to get started with the panel, I first came up with this idea to sort of look at a trope that has basically become part of the furniture at this point. I mean, we've had the Bechdel test as this sort of benchmark for, is text sufficiently feminist? Is it doing right by its female characters? And then we've also had this concept of the strong female character. But like, I guess what I'm really asking at this point is, we say it all the time, what on earth do we mean? Because I have never known two people to have exactly the same definition. And so I'd like to start off with having each of you kind of talking a little bit about your conceptualization of this idea, and also, it'd be a character that really for you is a good example of it done right. Who'd like to start?
I'll go. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
So I think that it's a combination of things, because you've got the definition that each person has on their own, but you also have this collective definition of the people who produce stuff. And I think you also see that difference when you have people who are producing movies, television, books, comics, and things like that, because you can go from, a group think, because a television show is written by this large group of people that may or may not be all or mostly cis hetero men, to books which are normally written by an individual but deal with editing and things like that, so you have a little bit more creative control, but also are written by a variety of genders. And then you take it back and forth with comics and films, and you also have to deal with the promotional idea of it. You need to get funding for it. So you need to be able to pitch this strong female character as a marketable thing and as what people are going to pay money to buy, to see. And I think that is one of the things that affects the cultural definition of a strong female character. Personally, for me, my idea of a strong female character is a woman who has her own goals, motivations, and challenges and doesn't lose sight of those. Mm-hmm. And she has the agency and ability to make her own choices, change her goals by her choice, and continue on with that and reevaluate her values as well, because that's what makes anyone a strong person. And probably one of my favorite characters who does that currently that I'm kind of obsessed with is Avasarala on The Expanse.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
I mean, she has the benefit also of not being, you know, a sweet young thing, right?
Yes.
She is a postmenopausal woman of a certain age who can say anything, and she does.
I think I saw somebody wrote somewhere that I want to be her when I grow up, kind of thing, you know. Yeah, was that you?
Yeah, I think so.
I think The Expanse does a very good job with that sort of thing. They have more than one female character who is strong in her own right, and you know, that's just a show that has really kind of grabbed it. But I don't want to take the floor away from LJ. You go right ahead.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting for me because I think I'm a different generation than the rest of you. I came of age in the late 60s, early 70s. And the media that I consumed at the time was mostly not about strong women. And in fact, it was really rare to have women be the protagonists of their own stories. And the first place I ever saw that was in A Wrinkle in Time, which was published the year before I was born in 1962. And I kind of proposed a Meg Murray test to go along with the Bechdel test. So you want, you know, is your protagonist someone who shows both struggles and strengths? Do they show a full range of emotions? Are they allowed to be vulnerable and still be the hero of their own story? And for me, the answer needs to tick all those boxes for a character to be a strong character.
Yeah. You flashed back on one of the characters I was going to mention that I read when I was younger, but yeah, I found that there was a real dearth of female characters that I wanted to identify with. I think, you know, I wasn't so much into genre when I was younger, but I read a lot of Judy Blume, and Judy Blume did pretty good with her characters. I mean, you know, she had female characters who, you know, really, I felt like that was one of the few areas I could get into. But when I started getting a little older and I would read other books, other characters, the women in those books were liabilities. The women were wives. The women were girlfriends. The women were children. You know, they were more the object than they were the savior in any way. And I think that shaped my reading for quite a long time, because even though I didn't think about it at the time, I wasn't looking for those kind of characters. There are certain books I was just not interested in reading. I was not interested in reading books where the whole pursuit was finding a boyfriend, being the popular girl in school. Those are just not, and that was hard to find with female-centered books. So I ended up reading Encyclopedia Browns. I ended up reading, you know, a lot more adventure stories that had male characters. I mean, you can all cringe together on this. I was a huge fan of the James Bond books. He's problematic in so many ways. I get it. But I liked having a character who just got shit done. You know, he was competent. He had all the tools. You know, I used to go around saying, I want a female version of that. I want a female who that can be their expression as well. And I think the closest we got to something like that, at least I got to something like that, was with Ellen Ripley. And the irony, of course, is, as we all know, and I'm just telling the audience in case some of them don't know, is that she was written it was a male, it's a male character. They just happened to hire a woman for the role in the end. And I don't think they changed very much. I think the idea was they didn't change much of the script. So that's not, to me, the bar. It shouldn't be right for a guy, hire a woman. There needs to be more subtlety than that. But I feel like what I wanted to say early on was that this is very much an evolving situation. The idea of the strong female character has been evolving for decades, and we are at a different place now than we were when Ellen Ripley first came out. But when I was younger, coming of age in the 70s and 80s, that was a character that I could be like, wait a minute now, you can do that? She doesn't have to be cowering in a closet while she's saved by the captain of the ship. Captain's dead. Wait a minute. This was all stuff that just kind of went, my mind just blew my mind. And I think we've gotten a lot better since then. But I think we also need to think about the subtleties of where we are now, and I want to get more into that, but I also don't want to hog the stage.
And I agree, we have gotten better, and there are more and more books, movies, TV shows headlined, written by women. Mm-hmm. And yet so many of them still write male protagonists. And the irony for me is that women had the empathy. We're told we had the empathy to identify with any character, mm-hmm. but all the poor men could only identify with men, and yet we're not considered strong in that way. And I find that terribly ironic. Mm-hmm. Even the authors that I later found out were women, like Andre Norton, primarily wrote male protagonists.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you bring this up, especially with the issue of empathy, because I think this is sort of bringing us to, again, kind of the definition, questions about strength in what kind of strength is this female character exhibiting? For me, I grew up in the 80s. And so, for me as a kid, Ripley is a revelation and this super exciting main character for a story. And I also didn't sleep for like a week after watching that movie at a tender age, but it's fine. But by the time I was a teenager, I was starting to feel a little frustrated that the women who were taking center stage in narratives, they had to be so unrelentingly tough. Mm-hmm. And there was never it almost seemed like a lot of the time there wasn't room for emotional intelligence or being really, really fast at solving problems, or just kind of some other forms of competency. And I found myself wanting that and not really being able to articulate what I wanted.
Yeah.
And also, I grew up the same time, similar to you, 80s, 90s. And we got hit, I think, especially hard with the not like other girls trope, which is a big problem. I think we're having more conversations about that and why that's an issue, and we're having more conversations in different places. The reason I bring this up is I've had an interesting time. 2020 has been an interesting 18 months, but I would not die. So I've fallen into like a lot of YouTube holes and YouTube customers and critics. And I've just seen so many wonderful shows on the empowerment of corsets. Mm-hmm. And that was actually what women chose to wear and how much you can actually get done. And here, let me actually show you what you can do in a properly laced corset. And let's talk about how you've got all these historical genre fantasy stories where you have this woman is not like other women, this girl's not like other girls, and why that would not actually work to make any changes, and how historically women who did make changes still fit with a lot of their periods women's, they were very feminine, and if they had stepped too far out, rejecting corsets and all of that, they wouldn't have been taken seriously. So a lot of times working within the, situation you have with the culture that you have, And that in and of itself is a strength that we don't see taken into the strong female character, because so often we have that not like other girls mentality. And I'm ready to, like, you know, kill that as well.
I mean, it's interesting because we're bringing up these issues of kind of what are the rules, who is enforcing them, and at the same time, who's awarding cookies for doing a good job and being a good, strong female character. And I mean, for me, a really formative moment, weirdly, was in the 90s with Deep Space Nine, with just being so excited of the characters of Jadzia Dax and Kira Nerys, and then watching them get diluted into nothingness over several seasons as they went in kind of weirdly opposite ways. And that's a whole different panel, I think, of a conversation. But I think that was kind of in a weird way for me, the moment where I completely lost sight of what does strong female character even mean anymore. I don't understand. And if you have the kind of personality who goes off and gets a PhD in cinema and media studies because you need to overthink literally everything, by the time I got to my 30s, I really kind of had it in my head that the adjective strong must be referring to the writing. And that's what it should be. And then I kind of got confused again when I was getting pushed up against reality and what, you know, both the industrial issues of how do you categorize things and how creators think and how audiences and internet discourse are going. I was like, right, yet again, I'm off on my own little island where I've got my private definition that I have overthought, and now I need to come back in and try to get back into the main flow of conversation.
Well, I'm hoping that where we are with the whole concept of strong right now is that it doesn't mean the literal thing. Okay, so I think we've allowed strong to the strong concept to dominate when it comes to female characters. And to me, this is not, you can either redefine it or decide that it's not the best word to use, because what that translates into is strong is physical. Not that women can't be physical, not that women can't have physical strength, but defining strong as physical, I believe, is very much a male view of the world. And it's important to find a way of not simply being a reflection of someone else's expectation. I think, you know, the things, you know, we want, the other things that we want to see in female characters is, you know, physically being able to drop kick a guy, like that maybe shouldn't be number one. And I'm going to go a little further and say neither should be the mama bear response. Okay, think about Ripley again. Think about Mrs. Weasley. You know, these are some characters that were like, oh, those are strong women. Well, Ripley's proved herself in other ways. But if the only thing is that this woman suddenly comes to the fore when her child is threatened, like that doesn't make her a strong female character. It makes her.
That's just another cliche.
It's another cliche. Again, it is a reflection of what is expected of the mom. And that again objectifies her as a character. And I was reading something just the other day because I was looking up bear with me for a second here. I was reading a story about the TV show Blackish. And what this one article was talking about is this is one of the very few TV shows where you had black characters talking to a black audience, as opposed to black characters explaining themselves for a white audience. And that's obviously a totally different conversation, but I think that you can take a little bit of that and extrapolate it into how many shows have women talking to the female audience, as opposed to trying to explain themselves to men. Okay. And that, I think, is the next stage we need to be heading toward with the concept of the strong female character. And not about who can she punch, not about how big her power is, not like what objects does she have that are magical. The things that I think Trisha brought up initially about, or even Marianna, that you know, does she have her own story? So there's other things that I think we need to find a way to replace with strong. And just one more thing, and I'll stop yakking for a second. But I think another thing that's worth taking into account is we're talking film, TV, and books, which is where we're going to see strong characters. I get that. TV and books have the luxury of long-term stories. The shorthand is in film, and that's, I think, why we see so many strong female women in movies who are out there punching. A punch takes no time at all. Having an emotional moment, being, you know, intuitive, other things that define strength that are not physical, that's harder to put into a movie because that eats up time. and Marianna will know this better than I do because you were in development and everything, but it's a flaw of it might be too much to ask from a 2-hour movie, but it's something we should definitely be expecting from TV and books.
We can ask for it from movies too. A number of them can give us that. I mean, I think what you brought up with Blackish, I think also brings us into something we should absolutely acknowledge here, which is also issues of intersectionality along with this. I mean, both in terms of race and also with ableism. In terms of this, you know, if it's about can she bench press 400 pounds, we got a problem here. And I am not going to be an expert to speak to either of those, but I am very aware that there are things that need to be in this discussion. And I think additionally, just with what you brought up with different media and kind of the different storytelling beats and the space they have to spread out in for their narratives with film versus TV versus fiction, I'll be the one who mentions comic books and say that I think one of the things I have really appreciated about contemporary Marvel comics is the way with their female superheroes, you frequently get these storylines where you're seeing these women have their normal lives, where they're not lifting cars or saving the world or whatever. They're dealing with email pileups and friendship problems and having to take the cat to the vet. And like, it's actually really neat to get this side of them. And I think fleshes them out so much more complexly as human beings. And it's great.
Gail Simone's done a lot of great work in all the comics that she's worked on with that, and just looking at the everyday BS that her characters have to deal with. And that's one of the things I love about her comics in particular.
And that gets to the point of who is controlling the messaging and who are these characters for. So something like you're describing, these are women who are not written for the male gaze. And all of the so-called strong women of media in my upbringing, while they had traits that I appreciated, almost all of them were consumption for the male gaze. You know, think of Linda Carter's Wonder Woman. Think of the Bionic Woman, who was just kind of like Eve, an offshoot of the $6 Million Man's rib. And her whole tragic backstory involved her relationship with a guy rather than having her own story that came out of some sort of strength.
That's a really good point. And I, when I was looking up a few things for this panel, I was really taken by this concept that Tasha Robinson introduced in 2014, talking about the strong female character problem and kind of some things that were disappointing her in current films. And she was asking, basically, she had a floor lamp test she wanted to put, which is the question is, okay, maybe this character seems on the surface brash and exciting and tough and yay, we've got this strong female character, box check, box check, box check. How is she being used in the story? Because if she can be replaced with a floor lamp with some useful information for the male protagonist written on it, this is not helpful.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It is good.
So I go back to your talking earlier, Marianna, about emotional intelligence. And I want characters, all the characters, to be able to show their vulnerability and to show that they can trust. Because without those two things, you have storylines that are marred by stupidity. Like if X just told Y one thing, the story completely falls apart.
It's the Three's Company fallacy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is my top most hated thing. If they just talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because people talk to each other.
Yeah. I mean, another thing that's interesting talking about emotional intelligence, the other issue is I feel like in some ways in efforts to get away from, okay, well, the test isn't that she can drop kick a guy or lift a car, but she's just an unflinching robot in the face of all and any adversity. And like, I look at this and I say, this, I don't know if this is strength or just someone postponing a breakdown. Like where does this metric come in? And again, kind of to get a little bit back to the specter of ableism for a moment. I mean, personally, speaking as someone who's dealt with anxiety my entire life, I'm looking at this saying, I'd like to think I could be a strong female character without having a personality transplant. Can we ever see these women worry about things and still admire them?
Yeah, I mean, it's about coming, I'm sorry, Trish, did you want to?
Oh, go ahead.
It's about coming up with a list of what we think are the sort of characteristics that really would define a strong female woman if we were creating them. And of course we are creating them, but you know, like what would this outline look like if we took away some of the things that have traditionally defined them, which are not necessarily have to be cast aside, but what's the next evolution? And for me, you know, it's more about an inner strength. Are they resilient? Are they able to reach for help? You know, like with any character, do they grow and change and learn and not just put on more muscles in terms of growth? You know, is there some self-understanding about who they are and then going with that flow? You know, I think that there are quite a few characters on TV who, you know, do fit that and have fit that, but they're not the usual model, because I think that you have a lot of writers' rooms that default to this old definition. You know, I can go and list some characters. I don't know if we want to do that sort of thing, but one of the first people that came to my mind was, I watched Homeland and I thought Carrie was terrific in that. That's the Claire Danes character. You know, she was seriously flawed, but like she knew her own mind and she wasn't going to let everybody just tell her what to do and say, oh, okay, that's the right thing to do. I'll go do that. And I also loved Mindy on the Mindy Project. You know, she was a total goofball. She was totally a mess in a lot of ways, but she was good at her job and you could rely on her to not screw up the job. So like, it kind of shows, it kind of shows up in different places and different ways, but it's about coming up with a new definition for the next generation of what we want the strong female heroine to be, if that's what we're going to call her.
I think from what you're bringing up, one of the questions that this immediately raises for me is, maybe what we're really groping towards here in some ways is a strong sense of identity for the character. Maybe this is where the word strong, what the word strong should be going in front of us, is does the character have a strong sense of their own identity and who they are, what they stand for?
Right.
I was going to toss out there. So I'm a big fan of Outlander. And I know it is a romance, but I honestly do think that you've got a lot of strong female characters in that aren't the butt kicking kind of strong. Claire is a nurse, and her choices are romance and like, but she specifically makes those choices. Like, this is her choice, her agency to find the romance that is working for her, and her choices as a mother to go back and forth in time to do research. The fact that she planned for going back in time by like sneaking in penicillin and building in extra pockets into her clothes. Although historically women did have lots of pockets in their clothes. That was another YouTube thing I found out. But she planned for that, and taking the time to make plans, and to me that is a sense of strength, because you're not reactive, you're a proactive character. This is what I want. This is what I'm going to do to achieve what I want. And here is my plan to do that with all the contingencies. And so that one I thought was a really, I still really appreciate it as a showcase of female characters. And I also really like I was hoping we were gonna bring up WandaVision. Because
let's talk a little bit about WandaVision.
Because that like takes that, yes, they're a bunch of like physically strong characters, but it also kind of turns it on their head in a lot of ways, because what's motivating them is a lot of like actual real people issues like grief and things like that. And you've got the three, you've got Wanda, you've got Agatha, and you've got Captain Marvel, and they're all motivated by their own things. Like, they come up with their own plans, whether or not they're great. And again, that's another thing that I liked about it, is that Wanda did not make all the best choices, but she was grieving. And you actually went into that psychological sense of a woman in pain, of a person in pain.
And we had 3 examples of 3 different female characters showing strength in 3 different ways.
Mhm.
Yes.
This is the point where I remind everyone about Darcy also, just because we have
Oh my God, yes,
Darcy.
4. Oh my God, yeah, she was amazing.
Dr. Darcy Lewis, who now has a PhD in physics. That was my favorite surprise in anything I've watched all year.
So yeah, so 4, you got 4 all very, very different ways of dealing with these issues.
And so I think another key issue that's coming up here in this conversation is humanity, that we're pushing away a bit from this gendered notion of it a bit and kind of pushing more towards perhaps the idea of, well, couldn't a strong female character be a recognizably human one?
Yeah, I mean, why can't it just be, you know, a strong person character? Can we just have that, you know, across the board, covers everything?
Well, I know that we're talking about women here, and I'm not trying to derail anything, but like, it would also be nice if we had, I think we're starting to see this also, but more male characters who can express strength in other ways. You know, I think everybody's been put into a certain box for a long time, and having, you know, male characters who can be protagonists, who can be in charge, who can be leaders, but who don't have to drop kick everything that comes in the room. Like I find that refreshing as well. Like,
It's
yes,
one of the reasons why I loved the movie The Old Guard.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Oh, it's so good. Charlize Theron. Charlize Theron is the primary protagonist, but there's a group of 4. It's her and 3 men who are essentially immortals. And there's this amazing scene because 2 of the men are partners. And there's this soliloquy when they're captured. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure. And it's basically, you know, the power of love from one man to another. And it's the way he fights back is by talking about his love. And boy, it gave me chills, and I've seen it multiple times.
Yeah.
That's moved up my list now.
Yeah, exactly. I have it on the list. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But yeah, you know, it'd be more fair and more realistic and more humanistic for both sets of characters, but both genders, and even, you know, as we talked about intersectionality, people who are, you know, all different parts of that spectrum, to just be free to be characters, to be human, and to not have to conform to a society's stereotypes and expectations of not only just their gender, but what strength means.
It's really past due that we, you know, maybe blow up this whole idea that there's this rigid gender binary which has carefully assigned control of different emotions exclusively by license to people identifying on one side of it or the other.
Yeah.
And, you know, anybody can have these sets of traits. It's just, you know, and my first question with the character, regardless of their gender identity, is just, are they interesting? Do they seem like someone I believe could exist in the world? And I find my frustration that a lot of the characters who are being presented as strong female characters are a little cardboard. Not all of them, but enough of them that I can get a little frustrated on that. I'm going to finish this thought and then we can segue into pretty much anything. But I just watched the Marvel What If episode with Peggy Carter, which is the first one. And anyone who hasn't seen it yet, it's an animated series, but they're using the movie actors' voices for the most part. And they're just doing little hypothetical little stories for half an hour about what if a plot point had gone very differently. And this dates back decades. The comics would put out these special issues periodically that would do that. Anyway, the first episode is with Peggy Carter, and I was excited for it. I didn't end up getting to see it for a couple of weeks because of various things going on. And meanwhile, online, everybody's super stoked about it. They thought it was wonderful. And I finally get in there and watch, and like, I was a little bummed. I loved the Agent Carter TV series. It's one of my favorite series of all times. I'm not ever going to admit in public how many times I've watched it, but if anyone at Disney is watching this panel, please renew it for a 3rd season. You have so much money to throw around. Anyway, this episode was kind of a bummer because Peggy was so flat. Like everything I adore about her character in terms of her stubbornness and her impulsivity and just all of these traits that make her incredibly unique kind of got flattened under, well, she took the super soldier serum instead of Steve, and now she can kick down doors. It was like, okay.
Well, that's part of the problem that we were just talking about earlier. It's like, rather than giving her more depth or more emotion, well, she took the serum, so now she's actually strong.
And it was weird because it was really fascinating as an illustration of like how that putting that piece in the writer's mind seemed to completely take out every other aspect of her personality.
Which is not what the super serum was supposed to do.
She should have been more impulsive, more stubborn.
So here's I'm gonna throw something back at you on that, because I was really curious, because I actually really liked it, and I read that as on purpose, because now that she had that physical strength and all of that, I still saw her the impulsivity, the creativeness in doing things, and I saw it as she wasn't perceived by others. Like those things were still there, but now that we see her as a super soldier, we don't notice them as unusual anymore. So I think it took away, and the art of it also took away a lot of her feminine characteristics. So, and it was a different approach than how they dealt with the serum in Winter Soldier and Falcon and Winter Soldier, because there was no physical body change to any of the other super soldiers in that series, unlike what happened with Steve. And I think that was an interesting thing to go with, where in this case with Peggy, you had that major physical difference and they drew her with more masculine. So I'm wondering if, again, this is being generous to writers, but what if it was an on purpose thing to say that now that she is perceived as more masculine, that impulsivity, that rebellion, because she was very rebellious and she did a lot of stuff without planning in that short time. She's like, you want me? No, I'm going to go do my own thing, and I'm going to come up with this own plan. And she didn't get as much flack for it as she did in the Agent Carter series, because she had a much more masculine appearance and perception. So that's my counterpoint to maybe that.
I will think about that. And so should the writers.
Yes, so your mileage may vary, but that's my interpretation.
I don't know if we had a specific thing you wanted to segue into, but I did want to bring up one other thing, because I don't know how much time we have left.
About 10 minutes.
One other element that I wanted to bring up about the whole strong female character is I also have a hard time supporting a strong female character whose primary function ultimately is to sacrifice her life so that others may live. If you have a lot of other female characters in a story and one does that, okay, fine. But if there's a dearth of them, the message to me should not be, you have to die because you are less important. And it's a shortcut to it's a shortcut to martyrdom. It's a shortcut to what a great person she was, even though she's no longer with us. It's cheap. I think it can be done, and it can be done well. I'm not saying never do it, but if that's the only reason you've created this amazing character so that you can kill her in the end, or all of a sudden, oops, I got to the end of the book and I just had to kill her, maybe rethink about some of your other characters and how you're presenting.
Yeah.
And I think, again, it's these problems get somewhat eliminated if you have multiple examples of different characters showing different traits. You can't just have one female character carrying the load as a representative for all female characters. It doesn't work for men, it doesn't work for women, it doesn't work for non-binary, it doesn't work for trans. One is not all. And I think too many creative properties have leaned on that.
Yeah, because it transforms them into an object or a symbol and away from a character, an individual. And that's when they become disposable. That's when they become wooden or cardboard or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm going to segue into a loaded question here, which no one has to answer, but I am curious. All of you have written books and stories, and I'm wondering kind of how much this discourse around the strong female character is living rent-free in your head when you're trying to write, and how it affects things for you. You can say as little or as much as you want on this.
It haunts me a lot when I do primarily horror and dark fiction, where you've got a whole lot of toxic female stereotypes. And so when I want to explore the things that tend to be fears of women, because that's what I like to explore. One, I often chat with I make sure that I have guy beta readers and I see how many of them actually get what I'm going for. And being able to communicate like what I want them to see is always weighing on my mind. And I do short stories, which has the same problem as film. I have a very limited cast, very limited word count. So I can't necessarily do a giant cast of characters. So I have my one character who's going through a thing. And so in the back of my head is always that worry that this is going to be a representation of, the female coming of age, the character of color, because that's all I'm working with in this one story is a single character that I'm following. So it is definitely in my head. And it's not even rent free. It's like costing me money. It's got an ongoing medical bill that I have to pay because it's perpetually under 18. so that's where so it is. For me, it's very much in the forefront of what I write, and I've always I try and always share with a lot of beta readers because I'm so aware of how it can be interpreted. So yes, it's there. I'll do a GoFundMe for the medical bills.
I mean, same. In everything I've written, I have tried to look at my cast of characters and subvert some of those obvious gender stereotypes by kind of parsing out the full range of emotions and humanity across my entire cast. And it's definitely something I think about. I want my female characters to sometimes be unlikable. I want my male characters to be emotional mushes. I kind of want it all out there because humans are messy, and I want to reflect that in what I write.
Yeah.
I almost don't even know how to answer it, just because it's not that it has no impact in what I'm doing, but I'm trying, as we mentioned earlier, I'm trying to write people. I'm not necessarily trying to write a woman.
Right.
It's that this character is female because I want her to be female. These are the things that she reacts to. I think sometimes if I'm writing and I bump up against something in my own head that feels like a cliche, and obviously I want to back far away from that, and maybe I even want to completely turn it on its head, like LJ was saying. So it probably does live in my head, but I just try not to look too carefully into it. It's sort of like, yes, I know you, go away, sit over there. I'm writing, and just trying to, write the character, write the person, and not write the gender, and not write the, the stereotype. And then I've been lucky. I haven't had anybody tell me that I've written somebody who's, really a throwback, but I have a lot of beta readers as well. So if that happened, I would hope one of them would say something.
Can I throw something out in there just based on what Randee said? Because it's struggling. So I also edit. And one of the things that I regularly end up having conversations with authors, new, because I specifically work with a lot of newer authors, is that the more female or non-binary authors try to be aware of it, even if it's like specifically like what Randee said, I try to write people, like there's an active, I'm choosing to write people. Or if it's more something that we're aware of and trying to avoid, where I have yet to have a cis male author think of that. Like all the ones that I've worked with, fortunately, have been really awesome when I've pointed out issues, but it's not in the forefront of their heads. It's not something that they're either actively thinking or actively avoiding. And where I'll hear it from a guy saying, I'm just trying to write a person, more often than not, when I see a guy do it, it's not, it does fall into a lot of stereotypes. But when I see a woman who's writing, I'm just trying to write a person, they're actually real people. Like it's almost like a subconscious thing that I think we have, that we have in our heads based on our experiences to be more full when we create our characters. And I found that really interesting when it comes to talking with creators.
I wonder, Trish, if that has something to do with the fact that women have had to work harder at code switching in a male world than the other way around.
That's a good point.
I think that's a fantastic point to end on, in fact, because we are running up against our time limit. I want to thank all of you for a wonderful conversation, and to our audience who will be watching us in the future. This is time traveling we're doing. And I hope you enjoyed the panel. And yeah, if you are a genre writer who is female or from a marginalized gender identity, that's our warning that we are done. If you're a genre writer who is female from marginalized gender identity who is interested in Broad Universe, please go to our site, broaduniverse.org. Thanks so much, and see you all soon.